Ani Boju, Kierstin Williams, Indigenous, Kitagan ZB, Ndunjaba. Hi everyone, my name is Kierstin Williams. I'm a Two-Spirit Anishinaabe from Garden River and Batchewana First Nation, and I'm a journalist based in Ottawa. As a reporter and a young person who grew up on the internet, I think that social media is at the forefront of storytelling and presents a unique space for new voices to share their stories and perspectives. The other day, I was scrolling on Facebook and I saw a post that says, "Man, I love Facebook First Nation." And while I think that this was a lighthearted joke about how a large proportion of Indigenous people of all ages are all on Facebook and use it as a primary tool for communication, this post also spotlighted the importance of understanding audiences and trying to meet them where they're at, especially as newsrooms. During the height of the pandemic, for example, there was a social distance powwow, which was a social movement where people posted videos in their powwow regalia to connect with one another at a time when we couldn't and arguably needed it the most. This era was a time of immense grief for a lot of Indigenous people. There was the findings of unmarked graves at residential schools, loss of loved ones from COVID, and the isolation of being unable to gather in community ceremonies. But platforms like Facebook allow Indigenous people to build a community-based space and connect with one another, regardless of whether they live on reserve, off reserve, in a big city, or away from their community. So with the rise of social media and digital storytelling, I think that newsrooms in particular are facing additional challenges to not only keep readers' attention, but to even get their stories to audiences. This past June, Bill C-18, the Online News Act, was implemented, and it was designed to force big tech like Google and Meta to pay news for links that appear as content on their sites. But kind of as opposition to this legislation, Meta blocked news on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And in my opinion, the impacts of this ban were felt most heavily in remote Northern and Indigenous communities, because as I said, a lot of Indigenous people in particular get their news on Facebook, but with the ban, they just weren't able to. So this created a space where communities had to get creative and innovative as to how they would share information with one another. This past summer, Canadians saw the worst wildfire season on record, and many Indigenous communities were forced to evacuate from their homes, often multiple times. And people were trying to share critical information to Facebook. But to combat the ban, they almost had to do like their own form of journalism, like citizen-based journalism. So they needed to copy and paste text from a news story onto their Facebook status to get away from this ban. Or they needed to share a screenshot of a news story. And this was honestly an additional barrier that I saw while covering these evacuations. This was an additional barrier for people who were arguably experiencing the scariest day of their lives. But despite challenges like this ban, the evolution of digital media is allowing everyday people to have their voices heard and to participate in journalism using this citizen-based, grassroots-based approach. For example, there's also a rise of Indigenous content creators using platforms like TikTok to educate mass audiences on Indigenous issues, share their community experiences, and even talk about pressing news stories. And I think that this is a unique space where newsrooms can do the same thing. Being successful on TikTok means getting creative, engaging with young people, keeping up with these trends, having to understand why this one sound is trending or why this weird format is trending. But that means gaining new audiences and you have to be able to articulate your story and your news hook quickly to keep your audience's attention. So how we might be getting our news might be changing, but it also presents unique opportunities for new and unheard voices to engage in journalism, and for newsrooms to get creative and keep coming up with new ways to not only keep older audiences, but keep younger audiences, and to grow their own platforms. Thank you. Miigwech.